นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Good evening. For those of you living in Australia. When the Bodhisattva, the Buddha to be, Prince Siddhartha, was considering to leave home, leave his wife and child and the palace and go out to practice, one of the main reasons for that was his thinking that just as there is day, there is night, just as there's good, there's bad or evil, just as there is that which is subject to birth, aging and death, there must be something that is not subject to birth, aging and death, which we now call Nibbana, that which is beyond suffering, birth and death. Thinking like that, the Buddha said he left the palace in search of the way to experience what we also call the unconditioned. Just as there's the conditioned, life is constant. Our life, our body, our mind is constantly affected by different causes and conditions, changing, arising, ceasing. Nibbana is the unconditioned, that which is beyond this process of causal arising, dependent arising. What the Buddha explained very well in the teaching on dependent origination. So in the beginning, he was just theorizing, speculating, just like we are as we practice. But perhaps the Buddha, the Bodhisattva, is different than us in that he'd been practicing for many, many lifetimes, and his wisdom, his mind was so clear and sharp already, even though he wasn't yet a Buddha. We suspect he probably had very deep intuitive knowledge in this sense that there is something that is the unconditioned. But the task or the challenge for him was to find the way of practice that would lead to that. As we know, he went to find the leading meditation teachers in India at that time, practiced with them until he'd learnt everything he could from them, and even bettered them in their own teaching, in their system of training, their system of practice. So he went off from them and thinking, probably going off at a tangent, going off in the wrong direction, thinking that the way to enlightenment would probably come from developing the ascetic practices, and he also could develop them. He was better at them than anyone else in India, we believe. He could fast for longer, he could hold his breath, he could go without sleep, he could sit without moving, he could face all kinds of physical and mental pressure and difficulty, and put his body through all kinds of hardship. He can do it better than anyone else. But it took him quite a few years before he realized this is still not leading to enlightenment. So at every stage of his practice in that period before, when he left the palace, he's gone out to become an alms mendicant. You probably wouldn't call him a Buddhist monk yet, but he's a monk, for want of a better word. He's shaved his head, he's wearing rag robes. For that period, he's constantly motivated by this wish for going beyond the ordinary suffering of human life, and must have had strong belief that there was something beyond that. Otherwise, there'd be no point for pushing himself in all these ways, pushing himself to meditate, to gain jhana, pushing himself with the ascetic practices, really pushing himself almost to the point of death. Stepping back from the brink of death and taking food from the Lady Sujata on the morning before his enlightenment, which just gave him enough strength to meditate and slightly change his approach. But at every stage he was, we believe, driven by this sort of confidence that he would find that which is the unconditioned, beyond the normal round of causes and conditions, birth and death, rising and ceasing, that affects all forms of existence and life, not just human, but animals and ghosts and devas. Everybody is subject to birth and death. He was driven by this search for something beyond it. So even achieving what you might call, the chance to be reborn as a Brahma god or a Deva, he didn't accept that as the highest, as the best, as true happiness, because he knew it's still subject to birth and death. Even Brahma gods live for maybe even billions of years, who knows, long periods of time, and live in great bliss. But they still don't live forever. It's as close as we get to the ideal of somebody who wants to live forever, and most people have that idea at one point in their life at least. I wish I could live forever and ever without any suffering. That sounds like a Brahma god, doesn't it? Just floating there in space wherever you are. No pain, no suffering, no bills to pay, no hot and cold, no mosquitoes biting you, whatever suffering you have in your life, none of that. A Brahma god sounds quite good already. And Brahma gods can live for such a long time. Some of them even think that they live forever. They sort of forget everything else, I think. But the Buddha still sensed this is not ultimate happiness. It's still subject to birth and death. Still a sense of self, which leads on to birth and death. So that's what he was contemplating on the night of his awakening under the Bodhi tree. It's a process of cause and effect, the causes and conditions that give rise to suffering in a human mind and give rise to craving and attachment and more birth. But also the causes and conditions that lead to the end of that, the end of craving, the end of attachment, the end of birth, the end of suffering. So we have both. We have the opportunity for both in this life as a human being. That's why the Buddha said it's such a suitable realm or form of existence to contemplate and to reach awakening, because you have both happiness and suffering all in one as a package when you're born as a human being. Whether you like it or not, you're having been born, then you're going to have some pleasure, but you're going to have some pain as well. But you can use that to your advantage, and the Buddha did. So wherever there was confusion, he had the confidence there must be that which is beyond confusion. There must be clarity, insight, understanding. Wherever there was anger, hatred, he had the confidence there must be the potential for kindness, compassion. Wherever there's greed, selfishness, there must be the potential for non-greed, unselfishness, kindness, generosity, non-attachment. So this way of thinking, I think, he used a lot and it comes out in his teaching. He's always talking about opposites. Where there is the unwholesome, there's the potential for the wholesome is still there. Where there's greed, there can be non-greed, and so on. And that's part of our faith in the Buddha and his teachings. Just this belief that ultimately you could say wholesome Dhammas, the skillful Dhammas, kusala Dhammas, that we develop and practice in our lives, can win over the unwholesome Dhammas, the akusala Dhammas. An enlightened being like the Buddha or an arahant, student of the Buddha, Sāvaka, proves that in the end, the wholesome is more powerful than the unwholesome. It's better than the unwholesome, it's stronger, it's more effective, more complete than the unwholesome. However, they went to great lengths to prove that to themselves through their own practice, and thereby also proving to other people as well. It's not like you can just prove it in a day. I guess some people can get enlightened in a day, but they've probably been practicing for many lifetimes. Enlightenment, awakening comes from lots and lots of practice, lots of development of the precepts, mindfulness, reflecting on the Dhamma, insight into the Dhamma. Yes. Lots and lots of that is the cause. But it can win over all the mental defilements. Or if you want to talk about it in terms of Mara, what did the Buddha do on the night of his enlightenment? He overcame Mara in all Mara's forms: greed, anger, delusion, fear, anxiety, and so on. Mara is all the obstacles, the problems, the difficulties, the people, the everything that obstructs us from experiencing Nibbana, obstructs the pathway to Nibbana. But Mara can be overcome with great patience and effort and cultivating the right qualities, the wholesome qualities of mind. So if you reflect on this regularly, you get a lot of strength and confidence in your practice, because you know it's up to you. It's only a matter of whether you are willing to put effort into the practice or not. The Buddha and all the arahants have already proven that wholesome Dhammas are stronger than unwholesome Dhammas. All those things that annoy you when you meditate, the restless mind, the sleepiness, the dullness, the doubts, the worries, the anger, the desires for things, sensual desire. In their nature, all those mind states that bother you are weak. They make you restless. They make the mind agitated, unpeaceful. And they don't really last that long because they're agitating in their nature. They can be abandoned because they're not permanent, they're not self, they're not a person, a being. And they're mental states that can be abandoned when you bring up the right qualities, the mindfulness, the insight, see them as impermanent, suffering, not self, then the natural conclusion of your mind will be let them go, don't hold on to them, because they only lead to more suffering. So the Buddha proved that wholesome Dhammas are better than unwholesome Dhammas, more powerful, stronger than the unwholesome. And we have to use that understanding as we practice. If you can establish mindfulness as you practice meditation, all those distractions will fade away because you won't be feeding them anymore. They'll go. If you put effort into keeping precepts, 5 precepts, 8 precepts, cultivating a sense of morality, then the immoral part of your thinking will fade away. If you don't feed it and nurture it, it will fade away. When Ajahn Chah was a young monk, he had this doubt. At one point he was very annoyed with everybody. As you get sometimes when you do a lot of practice of meditation and Dhamma, you've seen your faults, you've seen other people's faults, you're trying to work with them, you often get very irritated with everybody in the world. Even though you're trying to do something good, at the same time you get irritated, fed up. So he went off on his own, fed up with people. And then he had this thought, where are all the good people in the world? And he realized he'd got it wrong in his thinking. He was always looking for the good people outside of himself. You know, other people, searching around. And because people are people, people do have their faults, their mental defilements, their weaknesses. So if you live with someone or meet someone, well, sooner or later they might show you that. Doesn't mean to say they have no good in them. It's just you may get disappointed if maybe you thought they were better than they were, or you were thinking, or they just show a defilement, so you get disappointed. So Ajahn Chah had this doubt, where are all the good people? All I can see are people who do things wrong, make mistakes, behave in bad ways. Then he had this realization, the good person is within you. If you want to find the good person in the world, you have to look inside, into your own heart, your own mind. And you can't really appreciate the good in other people until you've appreciated the good in yourself, and you become really familiar with that, and you look for that, and you make it clear to yourself. He said after that it was easy to be with other people, even if they weren't always doing good, because he just come back to himself. The real good is in yourself, isn't it? And the more you focus on your own good qualities and develop them, the more you'll see and connect with other people on the same level. This is the Buddhist path of practice. Even though we do many things on the outside with other people and the world and try and do many good things, and there is a lot needs to be done in the world, you can't do that without also practicing for yourself, developing the good within yourself. And indeed, you probably won't develop much good outside until you've understood this point. People nowadays, they all talk about how people are very lonely. Technology and lifestyle reflects this problem where people are very lonely, can't connect with each other, even their own family or work colleagues very well. But I mean, the Buddha's remedy would be, go back into your mind and develop the opposite of loneliness: goodwill, metta, kindness. Whether there's anyone else around or not, you can do this. You can be totally alone on the top of a mountain or in a cave or in some remote place and still have a mind full of metta and not feel lonely. Because once you cultivate goodwill, at the very least you have one person there, you, and anyone else who happens to come by, if there was someone, your goodwill would start to affect them. And goodwill makes you feel cool, peaceful, happy, as opposed to negativity, disappointment, depression, aversion. It makes you feel ill at ease, unhappy. You notice people who develop a lot of metta, they don't really feel lonely, even if they're actually physically alone. And it's the same as Ajahn Chah's teaching, you've got to find the good person in yourself. This is the practice. We have to put effort into this, changing the mind from the unwholesome or the deluded or the attached to the non-deluded, non-attached, from ill will to goodwill, from greed to generosity, selflessness. And it can be done. Many people have practiced it and shown us that it can be done, but it's up to us to do it. And that's the sticking point. We often get lazy, but then if you notice yourself getting lazy, well, bring up the opposite of laziness: effort, energy. Sometimes we have to do that. Sometimes we have to make a strong vow, a strong intention to overcome our laziness, if that's our problem. If you find yourself struggling to get out of bed in the morning, or different times, there's things you need to do or should do, but you're not, you're just sitting there being lazy or being apathetic or being kind of sitting back sometimes. We have to remind ourselves, well, actually the opposite of laziness is there. Energy, effort, arousing energy, or reflecting on the impermanence of life, the uncertainty of life. While you have your life, you have your health, you have the opportunity to practice. Do it, because you don't know how long it will last. You can arouse energy and overcome laziness if you put effort into that, if you understand the point and make the effort. Nothing is permanent and fixed. Whatever kind of suffering we're experiencing, depression, disappointment, sadness, it can all be overcome, but with effort. When you meditate, you're learning that, aren't you? When you practice meditation, breathing meditation, you're learning to overcome distraction. Your mind loves to think about many different things, because it does that all day, because most days we're not very mindful. As soon as you start practicing mindfulness, putting attention on the breath, you see how unmindful you are, because your mind wanders away, can't stay in one place. But that distraction can be overcome by non-distraction, not giving into it. At first that's hard work, but if you keep teaching yourself, reminding yourself, after a while you start to ignore the distraction and you stay more with your object of meditation, such as the breath. So that's the positive message of the Buddhist teaching, is that everything can be overcome. Where there is suffering, there is also non-suffering. And often it's very close by. Just need a slight change in attitude, or to look at what's going on with a more detached awareness and realize, I'm just letting my mind wander into a minefield of negative thoughts or whatever it may be. I shouldn't do that. I should stop it, change, maybe restrain that way of thinking. And the same with our habits, our actions, our speech. Nothing is fixed. You can change. But it does take effort, of course. But you can. All habits can be changed for the better. Bad habits can be given up. Good habits can be developed. Just as there is day, there's night. Just as you have a negative thought, you can also introduce a more wholesome, positive thought. So in a way you could say the Buddhist teachings are the ultimate freedom of choice. If you're suffering, it's really deep down, really it's because you're holding on to thoughts and views and making yourself suffer. We all say, I don't like suffering, I don't want to suffer, but you're actually doing it to yourself. Some teachers actually say, you really like suffering. Like in the sense, not that it's kind of pleasurable, but like in the sense you're willing to suffer. Because it's the habit, it's what you know, and you're letting your mind do that. Think in those ways, to feel lonely or depressed, to feel angry, to feel restless or full of desire, things you haven't got that you want. You're letting your mind do all that. In the end, nobody is making you do it. It's your own, we say your own karma. It's your own mind doing it over and over again until maybe it becomes like an ingrained habit. So sometimes we see this from other people. You look around at other people, you realize, they're suffering. They get angry, they suffer, they follow their desire, they maybe have a lot of greed, and then they go and do something that hurts somebody else or even hurts themselves. They have fear, they have anxiety, it's suffering. Maybe you see it in other people and you realize, it is suffering. Then you look back at yourself, or sometimes you just see in your own mind. You don't even need to observe other people very much. You just observe yourself. Oh, this is suffering. But then you have to say, well, what can I do about this? How can I change this? One of the delusions I hear all the time here in the monastery, people say, oh, but I can't become a monk or a nun, I've got too many commitments, I can't do that. As though that's sort of an excuse saying I don't need to practice. But practice is not becoming a monk or a nun necessarily. There's been many lay practitioners who've understood this way of practice and done very well. A lay person can have a kind thought as well as a monk or a nun, just as a lay person can suffer, just as a monk and nun can. So our outward status in the world, our career path, whether we're single, we're in a relationship, we have kids, we don't. These are all things you have to learn from, but none of them are ultimate obstacles to the practice of Dhamma. They're just things you learn to practice with. But still we find excuses all the time. So we say, oh, I can't do it. I can't be a monk, I can't be a nun, as though somehow that means, well, I'm just going to carry on suffering here, getting greedy, being angry sometimes, being worried and afraid, and not do anything about it. And don't let your mind slip to that point. That's why it's good to spend some time with monks and nuns, even if you're not a monk or nun yourself. At least spend some time, because you learn a lot of equanimity and detachment when you mix with Sangha. I remember when I was a young monk, I'd go and see senior teachers, and they'd always be chuckling if they heard a young monk complaining about how hard they found the practice. I sit meditation, my mind is not peaceful, my legs hurt. Sometimes I miss home, I miss this, I miss that. They would just chuckle, and I always think, why are they chuckling? Because they've been through it all. They know the human mind very well, and they realize, oh, this new monk is just experiencing what they probably experienced when they were a new monk. But the way to deal with it is to practice some equanimity, some coolness of heart, and just chuckle and laugh at it. You have worries, or just laugh at them. They just arise and pass away. Worries are just worries. Even the thought I might die, it's just another thought, isn't it? Ultimately, that's all it is. I mean, I've heard monks with teachers, they go into their teacher, or the teacher visits them because they're so sick, they're lying in bed and say, whoa, it's painful, looks like I might die. And the teacher goes to visit and just said, okay, you die. End of your pain. Once you die, you won't have this body anymore, you won't have any pain. Okay. In a very matter-of-fact way. Part of the mind doesn't accept that, does it? Part of the mind says, what? How can you be so matter-of-fact, so ordinary about my impending death? But somebody who understands the body and the mind as impermanent, not self, they can be matter-of-fact, because that's the truth. You don't own this body. The body is 4 elements. You don't own a feeling, it just arises and passes away according to conditions. The delusion is we keep building up a sense of self all the time, the idea of a self, me, mine, myself. And that's where the suffering comes from. What did the Buddha say? He said, in the end, suffering arises and suffering passes away. And when your mind is clear, you see that, you know that, then you don't suffer, even though suffering is arising and passing away. It's just, we say, the suffering of the 5 khandhas. The peaceful mind that sees that doesn't make anything more out of it, doesn't create any suffering. But when we haven't understood this, what do? We keep creating suffering even out of the tiniest thing. You get a little scratch, oh, blood. I always tell the story about the monk who got bitten by the little dog, and he said it didn't hurt too much, but then he looked around and saw the blood and just fainted on the spot because the sight of blood made him faint. Walking on arms round, and he was behind me, and we were facing all these very vicious farm dogs in Rayong, where I used to live. They have a lot of dogs. Each farm has dogs, and the big dogs come charging at you first, but they don't usually bite because they're big and powerful. They don't need to bite you, they just bark at you. And you have to stand your ground and keep your mind calm, not get worried. But then there's always a little dog behind the big dog who's got to prove something. So the little dog came and snapped at the junior monk's the heel, the back of his leg. And I said, "Did he bite you?" He said, "Yeah, he bit me. It hurt, but it's okay." But then he looked around, saw the blood, and fainted on the spot. It can happen. You get injured. Well, these things happen. You're on your deathbed. These things happen. Somebody insults you, is rude to you. These things happen. Things happen. That's life. But try not to make more out of it than you need to. Sometimes you meet with success. People praise you. People boost you, people will build you up, lift you up as something special. Then another group of people will shoot you down and say, "You're nothing special, you're bad, you're not good." In the end, this good and bad is in your own heart, isn't it? You've got to find the good person in your own heart, not wait for other people to tell you you're good or tell you you're bad. You have to know for yourself. You have to develop that ability to know for yourself. Know your thoughts, your intentions, know your speech, know your actions. Otherwise, we keep generating and creating more and more suffering. Just out of these untrained, unskillful thoughts, we let them go. Letting go meaning we neglect them, neglect to do anything about them. Or as I was saying earlier, we like them. We like to think angry thoughts. Now, watch your own mind. How often have you been angry about something, some injustice, something not right, and you get angry and you kind of feed the anger because it feels correct. Actually think it's correct to be angry. So of course it grows and it comes up more and more often. Or if you're very kind of sad, lonely, you feed that. You think it's correct that you're feeling lonely because you're on your own maybe. You look for things to back up that way of thinking and it seems correct. Or when you have a desire, it seems correct. You're thinking of something you really want that you haven't got and it keeps bugging you, obsessing you. It seems correct to think in that way. That's delusion, isn't it? You don't need whatever it is. You can be totally peaceful and at ease on your own in the present moment. But when greed overtakes the mind, it seems correct to be greedy. That's part of the problem. The mind makes it seem correct. You call it wrong view, I guess. Right view says, no, it's not correct. You can let this one go. You don't need to follow that way of thinking. You don't need to hold on. That would be right view. The right view would say, no, that's leading to suffering. Don't think like that. Don't indulge that way of thinking. But wrong view says, but it's correct to think like that. I need whatever it is I need. Everyone's different nowadays. There's so many things people like and attach to, but we all have things we say, I can't function without my coffee in the morning. So I need my coffee. You don't need your coffee. You can get by, you won't die. Or I need my pillow when I sleep. If I don't have my favorite pillow, I can't sleep. Well, you can. Whatever it is, you don't actually need that. But your mind thinks it does. So it creates a sort of view. This is correct. I need this. I have to have this. If I don't get this, life is not worth living. I need a car. I need a second car. Or I need a house. I need a second house. I need an investment property. Or I need an apartment. Or I need this. Or I need that. Or I need my holiday at the seaside. or overseas, or nowadays it's not just go to the seaside, is it? I have to have my safari in Africa, or I have to cross the desert, or I have to cross the mountains. I need it. You don't need any of it. I'm not saying it's wrong if you do these things. I'm just saying it's when you look at the mind always sees it's correct to have all these needs and desires. It's like the monk I was sitting next to, many years ago now, in a monastery where they never offered durian. This is in Thailand. And this monk loved durian. And somebody offered some durian that day. They never offered durian, but that day they offered durian. And this monk's eyes increased in size about 5 times when he saw the plate of durian. It's like, durian! We haven't had that for months and years. My favorite. And the plate came down, and in Buddhist monasteries, if you've got a few monks living together, the sort of etiquette, the rule, unspoken rule usually, is that you just take one piece of something. You don't take it all because you're thinking of the other monks. It came to him, and he said out loud, "Oh, those Western monks, they don't eat durian, do they? So I might as well have it all." So he did. He poured the whole plate's worth of durian in his bowl. No one else got any that day. It's a small thing, but it illustrates the point, isn't it? When greed takes over the mind, there's always a good reason for it, and it's correct to be greedy, and it's correct to deprive someone else of their durian or whatever else it may be. It seems correct. But I mean, it's correct for you and it's correct for your kilesas, but it's not necessarily the Dhamma, because you're maybe feeding greed, feeding attachment, actually laying the grounds for more suffering. So in the case of durian, I guess, the more you attach to durian, the more you suffer when you don't get it. Or whatever it is. If you have to go on a safari overseas, well, if you don't get it, you'll suffer the more you attach to that idea. Actually, I once went on a safari, it wasn't that great. It's quite difficult. That's another story. Thing is, when we have kilesas in the mind, it seems correct. So we follow them, we indulge them. That's part of the delusion. The Buddha said, look at them and say, no, they're not right. Check yourself, correct yourself. Doubt kilesa. Is it really right to think in this way, to act in this way? Investigate it, look at it more closely. Don't just believe every thought. Don't just accept every thought, every way of acting and speaking. We have to question ourselves. No one else is going to do it for us. It's another one of those sort of things you pick up from the Buddhist teachings. No one can get enlightened for you. The Buddha said, I can't do it for you. We all want that. We want someone to bless us, teach us, give us the secret way to enlightenment. But nobody can do it for you. You have to learn how to teach yourself. Most people in the world, they spend all their time trying to teach others, tell others what's right and wrong, who's best, who knows best, I know best. We spend all this time telling other people what's right and wrong and where they're going wrong in their lives, and I know best, you need this. You know me, I often get coughs. So the last few weeks I had a bad cough. Hundreds of people come up to me and say, oh, you got to take this medicine. This is the one. This worked for me. This cough syrup, this lozenge, this herbal remedy, this remedy. I don't know how many remedies, easily 30 or 40 different remedies. And they're all right, they're all correct. Obviously it was coming from kindness, so I'm not putting that down, but what's good for one person or works for one person may not work for another. But we spend all our time doing that, looking at other people, but often we don't look at ourselves. If you're going to abandon greed, anger and delusion, bring up the non-greed, the non-anger, the non-delusion, you have to do that. Other people can point you in the way, but they can't force you or make you do that. You have to teach yourself not to indulge the defilements. Let them go. You have to get yourself ready to do that and get the right qualities of mind, the mindfulness, the insight, so that you can do that. So, tonight some reflections on the Buddha's teaching on suffering and the end of suffering. And the power of wholesome Dhammas in the end is stronger than the unwholesome, but we have to prove it through our own actions. Anyway, I'll leave the talk there, and in a moment, if anyone has any questions, we'll do our best to answer them.